Today we have Bohdan Zabawsky, very well-respected tech entrepreneur and tech leader in Toronto. Bohdan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I was preparing for the interview and I was digging through your LinkedIn, and your feed is almost infinite scroll. There's so many positions and you're doing so much work on advisory roles. We have something like 217 connections in common. Everybody seems to know you and you seem to know everybody. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? How did you get here? What do you do?
Okay, interesting journey. So I guess I kind of went into entrepreneurship in a very sideways manner or afterthought. I graduated in the late 80s and probably not a great time frame. We were just exiting a recession, and there wasn't really a great deal of opportunity. Interesting enough, when I graduated, the word startup wasn't even mentioned at all. Like literally, if someone had said, "I'm joining a startup," I would need some understanding, probably a discussion, what the hell is a startup? And I had a great job. I landed in but it was not a very entrepreneurial environment. It was frankly Bell Canada. And I was lucky enough to have a mentor that helped me grow and understand, large organizational culture and business processes and project management. And I moved around a bit and evolved as a manager and leader within that organization. But I didn't realize what I was missing until I had my first real startup opportunity. And I was offered a role at Clearnet. At the time, it was a wireless startup, pre-license. And I went from basically a 55,000 person entity to a 100-person entity, which was a big jump down. And people did think I was a bit crazy. Why are you leaving this great stable job with a great position, great opportunity to join this company that no one knows about? But I took a chance, and it was a decision that I've never regretted. So Clearnet was acquired by TELUS in the year 2000 for $6.7 billion, which is a big number even by today's standards. And the company grew from roughly 100 people to 2,500 people. We grew ongoing MRR or annualized revenue to about 500 million. So it was a great ride. And again, one thing I really appreciated about that journey was a degree of accountability and responsibility that naturally came with a entrepreneurial environment. And frankly, I never looked back. So interesting enough, I went after, I was offered a role in TELUS, but I wasn't really interested because I had done the incumbent telecom thing. And I went looking for something again, and a younger startup. And interesting enough, I was approached by who I previously knew as a co-op, Lucas Kukowski, and Clearnet, now TELUS. And he had started this little company called Rennie. And we met and realized we had a common vision for real-time OSS, BSS, aka billing system and rating system. And I joined Rennie as its first CTO. Back then, we were about 8 people, including co-ops. Again, producing revenue, but not particularly productized revenue. And that was another great journey. So I was Rennie's first CTO for the first decade. Again, a great journey. We bootstrapped all the way to IPO in 2007. It's still publicly traded. The company, I think when I left, was approaching about 500 people. I grew the team, engineering and product team, to about 170 people between Toronto and Pune, and it was another great journey. And in 2010, I realized that the world was evolving rapidly. I'd spent basically 2 decades of my life in telecom. Telecom had been very good to me, but I wanted to do something else. So I went through a number of interesting companies, including audiobooks.com, which is probably notable because the CEO is Sanjay Singhal, who's now Managing Director of 500 Startups Canada, then Ripple, which was acquired by Salesforce.com, and now I'm an operational CTO at Mercatus, which I describe as a Shopify for grocers, leading a team of 50 great, awesome engineers.
That's amazing. Most of the audience that we have right now is startup founders and leaders who operate in startups between 20 to 50 people, but struggling to break through that zone where you're no longer a startup necessarily, and you want to become a more past that scale up into a more mature organization where you want to preserve the speed at which you build and grow, but you also need to go through the just evolution of how you operate as a company. So hopefully that's what I'm really hoping to pick your brain on, is like, walk us through a little bit on how engineering or product teams change, or what needs to happen from the moment when you start a startup where everybody's wearing multiple hats. How does that transition happen into more specialization? What some pitfalls every founders or tech leaders should look out for through that transition?
There are a few things. So I was reflecting back on what you said, even in this journey at Mercatus, and I guess when I got there, it was about an engineering team in the low 20s. Now it's a size 50. And even in that span of time, we've had to evolve quite a few things. I guess just focusing on the various factors. One is it's fundamentally always about execution, but we distill what execution is. One factor is process. So what I find is process almost turns into a religion with people, which is a bit odd. And what I always say to the people I support is, if you can't understand why you're doing it, then it's probably the wrong thing to do. So what I say is, yes, processes are extraordinarily important. Processes, provide value to an input vector, then you apply value, and then you get an output vector. But with regards to process, I find people tend to get fixated, and they tend to get into a daily grind, and they don't think about, is this process still valid? So I'll give you a real example, which actually transpired in the case of Mercatus when I got there. And it was a bit of an eye-opener to me. But when I got to Mercatus, and it was a bit of an anomaly, but I noticed that all the walls were covered with cards, Kanban cards for requirements for software development. And I said, that's a lot of paper. They had walls and walls of, it was a very intricate system. They actually had, paper clips, markers, and it was really sophisticated. But what boggled my mind at the time they were actually using an electronic system in parallel. And it was Jira, which is a state-of-the-art requirements management tool. But the interesting thing was, when I observed how engineers were working, they were spending a lot of time reconciling between the paper-based system and the electronic system. And I said, well, this doesn't make sense. We're going to pick one. And because the evolution and scale of the Mercatus team going forward, we obviously gravitated towards the electronic system. And even then, what surprised me was there was still a healthy component that said, why are we doing this? Because we've always done it this way. And, and through education and reinforcement, I just said that, well, you're operating at about 30 to 40% lower productivity, because not only you're duplicating effort, but what happens if there's a reconciliation issue? You're spending a lot of added energy trying to reconcile the two systems. So obviously, once that happened, we were able to increase the productivity of the engineering team. But I use that as a typical example of how people can get fixated on process and not think about what they're actually doing. And the key is, as an engineering manager and leader and technologist, you have to continuously challenge the status quo. Is this really the best thing that I can be doing? It can be process, it can be a technological platform. In the case of Mercatus, for example, we've changed our front-end JavaScript framework 5 times in 5 years because it made sense to do so. Mm-hmm. So one thing I always look for in scaling is, are we actually doing the right thing in terms of, both process and the technologies that we use. Now, the other major factor in evolving teams is obviously people. And you actually have to look for people, well, actually, let me backtrack. One thing I found is there are really 2 factors for success, and this really holds true for any stage of a company. But I think what happens is people start losing sight. They, when they go through growth or hyper-growth mode, they just start hiring bodies, and that is a critical mistake that any startup executive can make, where we just need people, we're just going to fill seats, whether it's in technology, sales, or product. And what people lose sight is what made them initially successful. They spent a lot of time hiring. They spent a lot of time focusing on whether this person was a fit. Do they agree with the vision? Do they have the appropriate values and beliefs? And people typically stop doing that and when they start focusing. And this is actually a mistake that I made in early days of Rennie, where I just hired a lot of smart people and realized that was the worst thing I could do. So what I realized after my first initial foray or mistakes was there really two factors that are related with on-the-job success. One, I bundle under the general banner of cognitive fit. And the issue with cognitive fit, people tend to focus on the superficial, or what we call the thin veneer around cognitive fit, which is skills, intelligence, experience, tenure, what schools they went to. That's interesting, but I have found very little correlation with those attributes in on-the-job success. What I really try and dig deeper in is what I call, signs of life. And by signs of life, it's really the ability to learn, adapt, and evolve. And if, for example, if I go back to the Mercator example, the fact that we've had to change our front-end frameworks 5 times, I mean, you have to keep on learning. Like if you're fixated on jQuery, well, too bad, like because we're already on Angular, we're on Angular 1, evolving to Angular 3 now, so you have to keep up and always be in a state of ongoing evolution, ongoing learning. So I try and look for people with those signs of life around having that ability to learn, adapt, and evolve. The other thing which people lose sight on very quickly is this notion of culture fit. Now, culture fit is unfortunately hyped and overused. People tend to confuse it with personality. Very typical bad question is this something that we'd want to have dinner with? And no, that's not what culture fit is. Loosely speaking, the most, high-level sense is this person that will fit or work with the team in a productive and collaborative fashion. And what that amounts to, and actually there have been several studies around this, it's really a correlation on values and beliefs, and that inspired my own startup, Forte.ai, to look for that correlation of values and beliefs between high-performing team members and also incoming candidates. So the only way you can actually do that without using a tool such as Forte is spending a lot of time with that person. And that can mean person days of time. So before Forte, what it is, I spent a lot of time with each candidate, typically 3 sessions with myself, a session with HR, sessions with 3 to 5 cultural icons within the team, people that I believe truly represented the values and beliefs of an organization. And what we did was we needed unanimity in our agreement. Was this person going to fit with us or not? And if they didn't, we wouldn't accept it. And trust me, that's tough. Particularly if you have product to ship. But it's a typical mistake that a lot of startup executives make, that they try and gloss over culture fit and hire just for the sake of filling a seat, and that's unfortunately the worst thing that you can do. And actually, a company I advised went through this. I won't mention the name, but this is probably the most poignant example of what a bad culture fit can do. So the company was doing well. They were earning about 100K MRR. Then the founders had locked down travel. They were going to go to other regions. I think one went to Vancouver, one went to Calgary, and they hired effectively a CEO to just maintain the team in Toronto. And within a month, just 30 days, basically the entire sales and BD team quit. Wow. Most of the product team quit, and they had to fly back, eliminate or terminate the person, and effectively restart the company. Now they've survived, they're doing really well. I think actually their annualized revenues is in excess of 5 million right now. But they learned the hard way that one person can destroy not only a team, but an entire company due to culture fit.
How do you identify at that point when you have a problem?
It's part of my job to look for those warning signs. I guess there are several tools every leader can do. I'm a big proponent of one-on-ones, so that means the people I directly support, and typically the next layer down, which are typically team leads in the context of Mercatus. And plus, people can approach me anytime they want. And I've also made myself kind of very visible. So like, I don't have my own office. I sit amongst my team. So I look for signs that things are going sideways. Now, of course, that's not scalable infinitely. So I'm lucky, I guess, or I'm at a state of time where I can sit amongst a team of 50 people. But I understand, if we scale to 100, 200, 500 people in my team, we'd probably go multi-site. But the one thing that you can do is make yourself, one, as visible as possible. What you want is that canary in a coal mine where people will give you the straight goods, like what's working well and what's not working so well. You want that constructive feedback. That is crucial as a leader because the more information you have, the more insight that you have in an organization, the more you can actually react to it and also apply and execute on what the issue is. There are other tools that, like, I'm a big fan of engagement surveys, real-time surveys. So even if I suspect something, I may poll a few people, again, using the tool for it. But there are lots of polling engagement tools. But the key is to get as much information as you can and do walk-arounds, talk to people. Like, I don't think there's a strict formula. I have my own bundle of practices that have worked for me. And sometimes it's, there are also different leadership styles. So I don't think what I would do personally would be prescriptive or an absolute requirement for every other leader. But at a minimum, you need insight and information, and you have to figure out what works based on your leadership style to obtain that.
Yeah. So as companies grow, inevitably you're going to get so many different types of personalities and types of people. Mm-hmm. What is your opinion on this so-called personality type of brilliant jerks? People who are brilliant at what they do, but they're just intolerable to work with. What is your perspective on how to deal with those people? Okay,
well, interesting, because I've been thinking about the construct of what is a jerk. Mm-hmm. And interesting enough, because we've always encountered it, but I would say that everyone is a jerk. When you think about it, like, I'm sure I'm in a population of N people, I will be a jerk to someone because. Let's face it, we have different beliefs and values, but that was the epiphany that everyone is a jerk. So what makes us not jerks with each other? And there are really two fundamental factors that I found to be kind of the root causes of when someone says he or she's a jerk. It's really typically amounts virtually 100% to two things. One is different self-interest. They actually want different things fundamentally. And two is this culture fit thing, which is, again, a dissonance in values and beliefs. They actually believe and value different things. So I don't know if you want to reflect on your own encounters and personal jerks, but I found, once I reached that epiphany, it made my life a lot easier. As soon as I encountered a dissonance, both either on a personal perspective or on a business perspective or employee perspective, and I could detect that there was this dissonance, and said, it's not that they're bad people, it's just there's a better world for them elsewhere with people that really have the same interest and value and belief system as they do.
But then, do you think it comes down to I guess everybody is to some extent a jerk to somebody,
yeah.
But if there's a common symptom across the entire team, for example, against one person, yeah. Or they have concerns over one person, how would you typically approach mitigating this conflict?
I guess I've encountered it a few times, but one is you can see if the problem can be resolved. Sometimes the person may not be aware of their impact to the team. So obviously step one is understand what are the symptoms. What is the consensus? Is it really is it really unanimity across the team versus one person? And if it's behavioral or they're just acting in an odd manner that's creating friction in the team, one is to see if you can educate and resolve it. Now that may I'm just thinking that roughly I would say it's 50-50. And if it can't be resolved, you have to make the hard choice. If you retain someone who's creating friction and decreasing productivity, sometimes you'll have to remove them from the team and/or organization. But the faster that you can go through those steps and make the call, the better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's a very valid perspective. I have slightly different question. Sure. I'd love to understand a little bit better about motivation within teams.
Okay.
Obviously every person is motivated by different things, but do you see common threads in what motivates people on specifically product or engineering teams?
I'm thinking about the work of, is it Daniel Pink? They want mastery, autonomy, and purpose as being, I think that's a common theme. So I guess he provides a great video around this, and I have seen, as I managed hundreds and hundreds of people over time, I've seen that as a common theme what I consider in a knowledge domain. So as we get out of mechanistic, industrial revolution-oriented activity into probably the world that we both reside in the IT knowledge domain, people fundamentally react different in terms of motivation. So one of the fallacies is people are motivated by money, and that's true to some degree. But interesting enough, in my experience, money is a hygiene factor for the knowledge domain. So, in my hygiene factor is what I mean is if people think that they're being treated fairly, relative within a team and relative to the market, they generally don't think about money as a motivator. Now, the consequences, if they think that they're being treated unfairly, then yeah, that is an absolute demotivator, and it's going to be top of mind, and likely you're going to have an issue with that person that will have to be resolved, or they will leave the organization. But assuming that the money side of the equation is resolved and they're treated equally within the team or company, and especially relative to the market, because as you know, there's increasingly transparency in what people get paid in the industry. What I look for, if you look at people want to get good at something, that's Daniel Pink's level of mastery. They want to continue to get good at the craft, and that's particularly true for product and engineering and most people in the knowledge domain. They want autonomy. They don't want to be micromanaged, because I guess the one nuance in programming and product and knowledge, there's a science. When you code, you have to understand algorithmic constructs, but there's also a bit of art to it. I find the best solutions happen if you leave people alone or a team alone, and they come up with their own creative solutions. And purpose, that gets into literally a purpose vision. They want to believe in what they're doing. So in the case of Mercatus, something I characterize it as a Shopify for grocers. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to modernize groceries as we know it, and that, I guess, vision has definitely been validated with Amazon's purchase of Whole Foods. But we've had that vision for the last 5 years, and we continue to drive that vision, and we want to effectively drag grocers kicking, screaming to the 21st century.
Yeah. So you mentioned the topic of mastery. Mm-hmm. When it comes to career growth, in many people's heads, they associate career growth with management of other people. But with engineering, a lot of times people like doing it because they actually get to build things.
Yep.
How do you show career growth or progress within product and engineering teams, without basically removing them from what people really like doing and where they're really brilliant at, and forcing them to manage other people? Okay. How do you manage that growth? Do you bring somebody from the outside? Do you promote people from within to become managers?
Well, it is based on the person. So in the case of Mercatus, for example, in the last 2 years, with the exception of one person that we brought in to lead a DevOps team, we promoted from within. And largely, we look at each person's aspirations as well. Some people honestly do not want to lead people. They do not want to manage people. They are perfectly happy in developing their craft. As whoever QA automation engineers or developers or architects in some cases. But the point is that they may want to evolve, or they may want to learn different things. For example, in the case of Mercatus, we've had people shift from web development to mobile development, people moving from back-end development to DevOps. That's another thing that you can also put out there, that you don't have to be fixated on web development in this language. There are other functions that could be of interest and help them grow and adapt and evolve as well. So that's one thing that we've allowed people to grow. Just don't think yourself that you're contained as a web developer, a mobile developer, or a QA automation engineer. There are paths within the organization other than leadership or management. But some people, they do aspire to lead, and that's fine. So you have to figure that out. You have to give them the tools, in some cases, the training and coaching and mentoring for them to achieve that. And we've had great success. So again, the head of my front end teams, the head of my mobile team, the head of my QA team have all been promotions from within.
Yeah, so it's for some people they just want to increase the scope of their work, and then for some people they do want to maybe break into more of a management. It's more just being really attentive to what really motivates people.
When you think about what are our jobs as a manager, or more specifically a leader, my job as a leader, ironically, is to make myself redundant and generate the next tier of leaders. So if I'm not doing that, then what am I really doing as a leader? So it's really great. Like I can go on vacation, I can be here, I can put my phone on the flat down, and I'm not stressed because I know I have a great leadership team that will resolve any issue.
Where do you find that balance of moving fast but not accumulating technical debt? And then how do you, from engineering perspective or technical team perspective, how do you communicate to the business side of the startup to explain the importance of some of the non-revenue work that you guys do?
Well, one, I guess I'll try and unpack that a bit. I always perceive it as a balancing act. So, the nice thing once you get a team to a material size is you can start now allocating levers or some portions of energy or bandwidth towards different portions. So, obviously, there can be potentially professional services activity for larger clients. There can be product activity that helps with the evolution of the product pursuant to what has been committed to clients over time. But there's always this thing called technology debt. And people always wonder, well, how come there's technology debt if I have these bright people and that are always producing code? And fundamentally, when you first architect a solution, you don't know what you don't know. You make a best guess as to how things are going to be developed. What are the various parameters, the underlying database structure, and you implement your MVP. And guess what? 6 months later, you realize you were completely wrong, and that's how technology debt happens. So it's a bit, I guess what I like to use is analogies. For example, it's like basically, one example is car maintenance. If you run your car infinitely well without going in for scheduled maintenance to start replacing parts, fan belts and oil and whatnot, chances your car is going to stall and seize. You're going to wind up with a much more expensive repair bill. So I find the use of analogies very powerful in communicating to non-technical people, or people who are maybe less technically with a less technical background. I find that technology is typically the technology portion of my job is typically the easiest part of my job. The toughest part of my job, or the where I spend the most energy and bandwidth, is actually the people side of the equation. Like, how do I improve productivity? Because you do. Actually, I'm going to go back to another thing that you said, because you mentioned there's this great tension between sales and product that want things done yesterday, and engineering. That obviously has to do with several things. Like, where there's only so much you can do cognitively in a business day or even a working day. And if you have the people side of the equation resolved and they're working as a cohesive collaborative unit, that's where you're going to get the highest productivity. It's not by creating a sweatshop environment, trying to force 80-hour weeks. And yes, I've heard of all the alleged stories about, we cranked out, great code in 100 hours. And I would love to challenge those stories and look at their code base, because it's probably unscalable, incomprehensible, full of technology debt. So while they provide the illusion of working hard, I don't think they're necessarily working in a productive or a smart fashion.
Yeah. And the second question is, number one risk for startups is?
Execution. And it's a...
Yeah, or the statement goes.
And people have to realize that, great ideas are, ideas are great, but it's always about execution. And, and execution also defaults to. I've been in the startup community long enough to realize I've seen startups fail for a variety of reasons, and everything. It always 99% devolves not to that their idea was bad. Actually, well, that is that is potentially an issue because if they're copycat ideas, But if they have a great idea, I've seen a lot of startups fail because they did not focus on the people, they did not focus on the culture, they did not focus on the million tactical things that you need to do to move the business forward every day. And that's the thing that as a startup. It's a collection of near-death experiences, and to persevere through that, if you don't have at least 2 to 3 near-death experiences a year, I question even a well-funded, well-grounded startup, it's going to happen, and you have to. If you don't have the right team to persevere through that, you're going to fall apart fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. Bohdan, thank you so much.
Always.
This was very enlightening and insightful. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, happy to be here.